This meeting is held in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. The news media has been notified and a copy of the agenda has been made available to the public. This meeting is open to the public but with limited first-come, first-served seating due to COVID-19. All persons wishing to attend the meeting by virtual means may do so via YouTube, Sumter School District Board meetings. At this time, we will have our meditative thought followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Recording in progress.
I'm Dr. Baker. Valencia Gray Williams is also online.
All right, let's see what this one, I'm going to get to that. The mission of Sumter School District is to equip students to be responsible, successful, and productive citizens in a global society. Our vision, Sumter School District develops and cultivates competitive students who embrace diversity, act responsibly, and contribute positively to society. The mission of our committee is to ensure Sumter School District will provide transportation services that will allow opportunities for all children to arrive and depart school in a safe and efficient manner while including the voice of all stakeholders. The vision of the committee is to ensure all students enrolled in Sumter School District will be provided with transportation that is safe and sufficient while supporting staff with growth opportunities to achieve the mission set forth by the ad hoc committee. Our committee members are J. Frank Baker, Chairman of the Transportation Ad Hoc Study Committee, Brian L. Austin, Matthew Mike McLeod, and Cheryl P. Ray. Our subcommittee members are Anita Hunter, Bevelyn Collier, Denise Jones, Jason Johnson, Louis Tisdale, Teresa Sullivan, Valencia Gray Williams, and Alicia Case Rodriguez. Our staff members are Dr. Penelope E. Martin Knox, Superintendent, and Amy Hanson, Administrative Manager to the Board. And we also tonight have several of our committee members participating virtually. Valencia Gray Williams, Anita Hunter, Denise Jones, Teresa Sullivan, and Bevelyn Collier. I didn't miss anybody, did I?
No, sir.
Amy?
No, sir.
Okay.
They're
All
still
right.
having a hard time hearing you.
They're having a hard time hearing me. I'll pull the mask down and I'll get closer to the mic. Is that any better? Okay. No? This meeting is called to order. And I certainly want to welcome our attendees, and we are pleased to have our members and guests join us for this committee meeting.
Dr. Baker, Jason Johnson just entered the meeting.
All right, Jason is now in our meeting and he has joined virtually. Welcome, Jason. With no objections, the agenda will stand approved, and our consent agenda, if there are no corrections, our minutes will stand approved from our last meeting. Realignment update review of the draft options, and at this time I would like to welcome Matthew Cropper of Cropper GIS Consulting, and at this point I'll turn the meeting over to him.
Thank you, Dr. Baker, members of the board, and committee members. Thank you all for coming and participating in this process. If there is communication or somebody wants to get my attention from the boardroom, I'll keep an eye on the camera and things like that. The audio is a little bit choppy. And so if I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. But I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. This presentation up. So tonight is the second committee meeting for the realignment study. And tonight what we really want to cover are, we want to review some updates since the last meeting and discuss any questions that the committee may have. We have some draft options that we're going to share with you, and I have identified some advantages and limitations of these. I cannot stress enough that these maps that we're about to look at are very draft, and they are subject to change. This is the nature of a process like this, in that when you enable transparency and openness, people get to see things at the very early stages. So what I would just encourage you and reiterate to members of the public and also committee members is that these maps are draft and they are subject to change. Really tonight I want to share these two maps with you, get some of your gut reaction and some of your feedback, and really just start thinking about ways to make changes to the maps or create new ones. We have a lot of material to cover tonight, and I'd like to, really my goal tonight is to give you an overview of the data and materials. There's a packet of information that all of you should have now that has the statistics and maps in it. And I want to orient you with the data that we're going to be sharing at every meeting from here on out, and then how to interpret the maps. And then we're going to dive into the maps a little bit. I don't anticipate us having a ton of, a lot of creative discussion around how to change maps, but really, I would be happy tonight if we could review the maps, get some of your initial gut reaction to what you think of the maps and some of the numbers and statistics, and make sure we're on the same page with some of the parameters and data that we're looking at moving ahead as we work on options. So don't, and I know that these maps may elicit a shock factor because they are different than how the current district looks. And so, but I would just caution you not to consider these things final, and that they are subject to change, and they will change through the course of the study. We very rarely, if almost never, have seen the very first one or two maps that made it to a committee process make it to the final recommendation. There are always changes, and that the value of you and giving us your input and what you think about maps, the maps, is really what drives change and things like that. So I'm going to talk just a quick review on our objectives and the background. I think everyone on the committee is clear with why we are here. We're basically looking at developing a set of realigning zones to accommodate all the schools in the county, looking holistically as city and county together. The zones are still remnants of the past when there was a city district and a county district, and the zones do have transportation inefficiencies currently, and that students are transported further from their homes than the closest school. So we're going to look at that. Transportation efficiency is a key part. I mean, we are working with an ad hoc transportation committee here, after all. But we're looking at all three levels, and we're looking at developing a plan that best meets the needs of all students in the county. And so that's really what we're here to do. Us as Cropper GIS are the consultants helping this. We're coming with an objective point of view. We don't know Sumter County like you guys know. We are looking at things from a data and mapping standpoint, and just really, we're still learning Sumter County as we develop options. And so these two options have informed me and give me some thoughts on ways that they need to be changed or things that we can and maybe cannot do. So we want to focus on the realignment criteria, address imbalances in utilization of schools. You'll see that you guys in the district have a lot of space in this district. And so overcrowding isn't really an issue in Sumter County as it may exist in other districts. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that the buildings are equitable in terms of how full the building is and how in terms of utilization, and also looking at the number of students that are in each building, and getting your input as we work through all of this. The transportation inefficiencies are something we definitely need to look at and try to establish zones that enable students close to their home. This is a recommendation is planned. We're working towards a recommendation in March 22, so we've got several months to work on this, but a lot of ground to cover. Just a quick point at the timeline. Here we are, September 30th. You can see that the peach-colored cells are all of our committee meetings. So we have this meeting and 2 more meetings, which is I would just have you focus on this first block of time up till December 14th, and really focusing on building some options that we can take to the public in December. Not looking to try to find all the answers right now, but just looking to build some scenarios that we feel meet our criteria and best meet the needs of all the students in draft form still coming in December. And you can see we have another public info session again in February after some more committee meetings. So lots of time, a lot of work that we're going to have together and looking at these maps. Talk about the criteria. I've covered these pretty well. I think you guys have all seen them, but these are basically our rules to follow as we look at evaluating options. We're looking at balancing school facility utilization and equitable utilization across the schools. Account for future growth and looking at high growth areas if they do exist, and that's input that you guys can help provide and inform us on. And then close proximity, that's trying to assign students close to their home if at all possible, and that's certainly part of it. Busing efficiency and transportation, that goes in hand with close proximity and things. And then feeder patterns is something that we have data on, looking at how much of a school feeds to a middle and how much the middle feeds to a high school. And we'll talk about that. Legacy enrollment, so that's allowing the last grade level of each level, elementary, middle, high school, if they're in this final grade level at the year that these zones do take place, they're allowed to stay at their current school, but they do have to provide transportation or have transportation provided, and siblings are not eligible. We're counting how many students are impacted, so we've got some data on that. And then looking at the impact on economic, cultural, and ethnic diversity. So looking at what are the demographics of schools now, what are they the options, and are we drawing closer to an average of the county, or are we getting further away? We want to try to make things better or the same in terms of the balance of demographics, but we want to try to not deviate further away from the average, if at all possible. Looking at all the other factors, there may be cases where it does occur, but it's things that we have to discuss. Contiguous zones. So you guys have a couple of satellites that we have resolved in these first options, so we're going to talk about that, look at those. You don't have any satellites in the new options that we have drafted, but these are satellite zones or separate zones from the main zone that the school surrounds. And then using major roads to define zones, trying to draw the lines around either the center of the road or picking up both sides of roads, especially in the rural areas, things like that, thinking of transportation efficiency and also how people travel from home to school. But all these criteria are in no particular order or priority. The best plan is the one that's going to touch on all these criteria as best as possible. So just some follow-up to the questions or updates since the last meeting. We did perform the strengths, limitations, advantages, and challenges exercise at the last meeting. We have a summary document posted at sumterrealignment.com that gives an overview of the exercise. It was very informative to us and helped me to understand some of the thoughts with committee members from the start. And that information is available online, and you can go look at that. But it's just basically reporting back what was discussed in that particular exercise. Like I said, we have 2 draft options to share with you tonight. You have a handout. Everybody should have a handout in front of them or on their computer screen. If you don't have the handout, you can go to sumterrealignment.com and go to the September 30th committee meeting tab. If you scroll down, you'll see it there, and you'll see the option statistics handout. You can pull that up. I'm going to be referring to it tonight. And then we also have an interactive map that has the options live on it as well, and that's something that's going to be used as a different utility. So, we just can't stress enough that everything is draft and that these are subject to change, and we're basically looking at making edits to maps based off of input that we get from all of the stakeholders. You guys are one component, the committee members are a critical component to this, and board, and then also we've got public comments that are out there. We've received 6 comments so far. They are basically related to proximity to school and looking at getting closer to schools. And so we're looking forward to getting more input from the public as we, especially as options start to come out. So when we get into this and look at it, there's a lot of information if you have had a chance to look at the handout yet. If you haven't, no big deal. But there's a lot of information. Sometimes it does feel overwhelming. We take for granted that we do this on a daily basis for districts all over the country, and I'm used to looking at, and my staff used to looking at data multi-level and all the information. But as members, as Sumter County school parents and members, committee members, you may not have seen all of this. And so I always suggest study the tables. Look at the data, the numbers, and all the tables, and compare them to the current options, and see kind of how does it look. Look at the current versus the option, and see how does it deviate or get better or change. And then question, if you see an imbalance or something that may be out of balance, flag it and say, why does that imbalance exist? Or just look at it that way. So I study the tables, and then I like to look at the maps. So look at the current shape, the current zones and the option zones. Look at the way the maps change. And I'll show you how I do it with the interactive map toggling back and forth. It can be a very, very useful way to kind of like when you're at the eye doctor and they say, this one or this one. You can kind of like toggle back and forth, and it really helps to see moves that are happening. And think about the road networks and how students may travel to school from areas that are maybe rezoned or realigned. So, and then once you do that, kind of start putting them together. How does the table relate to the map? And how does the map relate to the table? And you'll get better at this as time goes and as you continue to look at the information. Always keep focus on the objectives and criteria. So whenever you're thinking about making a change or when we look at a change that's made, let's always ask, how is this bringing us closer to adhering to our criteria and our objectives? And is there any way to improve it? Should we undo the change because it maybe not aligning with the criteria, or do we maybe make a change to the change, or adopt the change to try to adhere as best as possible to the criteria? So I'm going to get into the statistics here. I'm going to talk about the data. Really, I'm not going to dive in this section of the presentation. I'm not going to dive into the individual numbers. What I really want to do is talk about the different sets of data that you're going to be seeing and what they are and how you can interpret them. One of the key things to talk about at the front end of this is how we estimate enrollment for our options. There are a large number of students currently within the district that attend schools from out of zone. In some cases, there's almost a third of the enrollment of some schools may be coming from outside of their attendance zone. And this is something that we see often or are asked to resolve many times. It's okay. Usually a district sometimes allows some students to attend from out of zone, but then over time it starts to get a little bit out of hand. And next thing you know, you have a real imbalance in the number of kids in an area that live in a zone versus the number of students that are enrolled there. It creates an imbalance in the utilization of schools along with transportation and efficiency. So when we're doing this realignment study, our focus is to develop zones that account for the students living in the zone. The assumption here is that if you live inside the zone, we're building space in the estimates based off of students that live in that zone that go to Sumter School District. And trying to lessen, as a result of this, when the realignment does come into place, trying to lessen the amount of students that are traveling in and out of zone as they enroll to schools, and make it equitable so that schools have enough space and equitable capacity to serve the students that live inside the zone. And does anybody on the committee have any questions about that, or any concerns about the way that we're estimating enrollment? You can always type it in chat if you'd like. If you have any other info, or if you have any feedback, we'll keep an eye on chat as well. And but we're basically looking at live-in. A couple things I wanted to show you on the next slide here is to demonstrate some of this. Like if you look at this matrix, and I talked about this matrix at the first committee meeting. This is the live-attend matrix. This tells us how many students live in a zone, how many live out and attend in, and so on and so forth. If I look at, like, for example, Alice Drive Elementary, the first school that's on the list here, you can see that there are 212 students out of the 629 enrolled that are coming from out of zone. And then likewise, there are 58 students that live in, attend out. So there is a lot of imbalance in kids coming in and then leaving, and it's best practice to work based off of a model that where students live in the zone, you go to that school. We don't want to compromise programs. If there's some type of program that needs to be identified that's drawing a lot of students from out of zone, that's something that we need to be aware of and account for. But I think that a lot of what we're seeing here, and some of the high numbers of live out, attend in, are really just more related to just students, parents enrolling students from out of zone, and it just sort of compounding into a situation where we have a lot of it going on at many schools, and students leaving and then coming into various schools. If you're looking at middle schools, you can see the same thing occurs in middle school, and then as well as high school. Not as much at high school, especially when you're getting at bigger numbers, but you still have it occurring. And so this is just to demonstrate that. We can refer back to this if we need to. We're talking about some things. So sometimes you'll see that when we make a change to a map, we're counting the live-in students, where we may be taking area away from a zone, but the numbers that we're estimating for that school remain somewhat stable. And the reason with that is that we're counting the kids that live in the area, and we're assuming that those students that may be traveling in are going to return back to the school zone that they live in. So let's talk about some of the data that we're going to be looking at from day to day as we work through this. And so this is the first set of data that we look at. It's basically the estimated enrollment. You can see we have the total enrolled, and then we have the estimated enrollment for options 1 and 2. And so these basically, if somebody asks how many students are they estimating for this school in option 1 and 2, this is the table you would refer to. This is how many kids we're counting in the buildings for any option, and also counting based off of the current zones. So you can see how the total enrollment now looks to each option, and how we've reduced numbers and added numbers to try to bring that equitable size of schools and also utilization. One of the things I noticed in Sumter is your elementary schools are pretty large. They're larger than what we normally see in schools across the country, like 1,000, 1,100 students, 1,200 student school. And so in addition to utilization, you also need to look at the number of kids that are in the building and see, elementary schools somewhere between 300 and 500 or something around there is kind of like an ideal range maybe for a school size for an elementary. So it's, in addition to the utilization, you also have to think about how many students may be in a building. Like Rafting Creek Elementary, 117 students enrolled, 650 capacity. Us looking out at this initially, that tells us that Rafting Creek needs more students. And so you can see we've added more students to bring them up to about 300 enrollment. And that's just an example of trying to bring schools into some balance of not only utilization, but also relatively the size of the student body. The next table is the same, it's looking at the same data, but it's looking at it in terms of utilization. So this is how full is the building. If someone asks you, how full is the building? Well, it's about 75% full, it's about 50% full. That's how you would, this is the table that you would refer to in looking at that. And you can see that utilization is fairly low from my assessment of overall. 52% is about, if you looked at all the elementary students and then all of the elementary seats in the district, you're running about 52% utilization. And so we're looking at balancing that out. Some schools are on the higher side and some schools are on the lower side, and trying to bring the ones that are maybe in the 70s and down, and trying to get them closer to the 50% range is really what we're trying to look at, so that there's equitable amount of space, but also being mindful of how many kids are in the building as we work through it. So this is the utilization table. We also have demographics. So we look at, we have the data in terms of Black, white, Hispanic, and other races, and we look at the current demographic composition of the schools, and then for each option we compare, we have a resulting demographic percentage. And so we've been studying this and looking at it, and have some comments for the options as it relates to all of these factors, including demographics. But you can see these would be the demographics for the options, and these are in your packet, and we'll dive into these more. They're so this basically informs us on the impact of demographics as it relates to the options, comparing it to the current, and continuing to evaluate these. We've calculated the numbers of students that are impacted. So in each option, you can see we have the total number of students impacted for each option. And then down here, you'll see these detailed tables of green and tan cells. These basically tell us where the students are moving. So if you want to know in option 1 how many students are moving from Alice Drive to Croswell, for example, you can see that there are 12 students that go from Alice Drive to Croswell in option 1. And likewise, all of the tan cells sum up to the total number of students that are impacted. The green rows are ones where students were not moved. They were students that were not impacted. And as we look at this, feeder pattern splits. So this is how we're calculating the percentage of splits for schools. So we look at the current, and we also look at every option. So 100% means that the elementary feeds 100% into the middle school. When you start seeing, for example, Millwood currently feeds 56% into Alice Drive and 44% into Bates. So when you see the name listed twice or maybe 3 times, it indicates the school that's split, that is split between 2 schools. We want to try to keep the split balanced, like the Willow Drive at the very bottom, the 92% to Alice Drive and 8% to Chestnut Oaks, is something that's not ideal for a split. You want to try to have more of a balanced split if you have to split schools. We like to try to stay above 20%, maybe 15% at the lowest, if at all possible. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but it's something that we look at, try to make sure that those splits are balanced. And then we have them for each option as well, so that you can compare to the splits and how the schools are split from elementary to middle. And I have some interpretive info to interpret the splits for the options currently. So those are, in a nutshell, the format of some of the data that we are looking at in terms of the statistics. You'll notice that the middle and high school tables are all in the same format, and I will be toggling over to the data and numbers as we work through the maps. Does anybody have any questions about any of the data or anything that I've covered so far? Okay. Well, with that said, let's go ahead and look at some of the maps. And what I've done here is I have taken the maps, and we've been studying these maps. Once they were drafted, we've been analyzing them to see the advantages and limitations as we see them. I think that you guys will certainly have more input regarding the advantages, limitations, and things that you like or don't like about these maps. One of the things that I will be doing is toggling over to the interactive map, which this allows us to see the zones in more detail. As we zoom in, we can start to see more information, and as we talk about the maps and look at them, I will be zooming in and using this as a resource and toggling back and forth on options, so that we can kind of see the before and after and how it looks in the options. Kind of like that eye doctor analogy that I gave you earlier. But here are the elementary zones, the current ones, and I'm gonna go ahead and get into elementary option 1. So elementary option 1, what I'm gonna do to review the option is I'm gonna go to the interactive map, and I'm gonna come back to this and talk about some of the advantages and limitations that I have. What I would encourage you as committee members is to look, have the materials, the handout as I'm talking through this, looking at it and looking at the map, and any time you have a question or something, I think the best way may be to post it in chat, and then that's something that I can see because I have my chat window on another screen, and that'll help me make sure that I'm not missing something that people want to ask or communicate on. But let's talk about elementary option 1. So I'll start right down here in the southeastern section of the county. So this is the current zones, and option 1 looks like this over here. And I'll focus on R.E. Davis right now because it is the one of the schools over here that you'll see does have some impacts. So if you look at currently, R.E. Davis has Route 401, Oswego Highway, and then Route 15, Main Street coming down that feeds into the city. This area over here is currently zoned to R.E. Davis. In our option, looking at this, you could see that this area of 401 and Route 15 feed into Chestnut Oaks Middle School in this particular, Croswell Drive Elementary School. And this is done really more for proximity. As we see it, these roads travel right into, they pretty much go right to Croswell Drive Elementary. And as our focus, we're tasked to look at transportation. This is something where you can see it's pretty clear on the map that it would be a more direct route to get to Croswell Drive than going across to R.E. Davis. Anybody have any comments about that or thoughts about that particular adjustment? And you'll see that R.E. Davis, in this particular scenario, a lot of times as we make changes to the maps, we take some area away and then we add some area to it. But sometimes we'll take area away, but we're not adding anything back to it. And the reason behind that is trying to balance out the number of students in the schools and the utilization of the schools. Keep in mind, in this case for R.A. Davis, you'll see that we took students to Croswell Drive, but the R.A. Davis numbers don't really move a whole lot in our estimates. And that's because there are about 20 students or so that live in R.A. Davis that are traveling out, and it's being balanced by the numbers, the students that were moving out of R.A. Davis in this area. And so the numbers come out about the same as we're assuming if you live in the zone, you go to that zone school. I'm going to zoom in a little more and see a little more detail in the city here and in the southern part of the district. So I'm just going to toggle back on elementary, current, and the option. So now my eye looks at down here, Kingsbury and Wilder. You can see Kingsbury has the brown zone, and Wilder is the blue zone, the teal. And you can see the brown area over here. This is a satellite area that exists for Kingsbury. If you look at option 1, we've resolved that and fed the area that used to go to Kingsbury and have that going into Wilder now. This was done to resolve the satellite area as well as assign these students closer to their home, which Wilder is closer for them. And I'm going to toggle on elementary again. And another thing you'll note on these two schools that I've just talked about is that over here on the far western end, down St. Paul's Church Road, is in south of Wedgefield Highway. This area currently goes to Cherryvale. And in option 1, we have taken that south of Wedgefield Highway and sent that to either Kingsbury or Wilder. And this was also done to balance the utilization of the buildings. We're also thinking holistically at middle and high school as well and trying to maximize feeder pattern alignment. So a lot of this also falls, some of the rationale may be to try to get a better balance of feeder patterns with this. But these students would come out down off St. Paul's Church Road that were in Cherryvale currently would go to, if you're north of McCrae's Mill Road, you would go to Kingsbury. If you're south of McCrae's Mill Road, down to the creek, Kane Savannah Creek, you would be going to Wilder in this particular example, or draft option. Ocala Springs, I hope I'm saying that right, does not really have any impact in this particular option. They are not, their zone is pretty compact. Most of the population is near compact. Is it Ocala Springs? Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And so in this particular draft that we have for this one, this school is not impacted. Looking out at this building down here, Pinewood, let's see, Manchester Elementary. The label was covered up. Manchester Elementary as well does not have any impact to it. So for Ocala and Manchester Elementary, the zone lines have not been modified in this particular scenario. Going back in and looking at Cherryvale again, let's take a look at Cherryvale and see what happens to Cherryvale. Cherryvale, like I said, they lose the southern part south of Wedgefield Highway, and then and other than that, they don't gain any area in this particular map, and they just lose that southern area, southern tip to Kingsbury or Wilder. Looking at Millwood, let's zoom in here so we can see Millwood. Current zone and option zone do not change for Millwood. And Alice Drive has a small satellite that actually exists, a small development that exists off of Robert Graham Freeway, and that is resolved in this option. So you can see the Alice Drive map does not change much other than the satellite in this particular map. But you will notice that the numbers for Alice Drive do go down quite a bit. And that is because the assumption that we have is that the students that are attending from out of zone would go back to their home schools, and that really, in this particular scenario as it sits here, puts Alice Drive at a somewhat equitable number of the other schools in this particular option. Looking at Willow Drive has some area that's close to Croswell Drive on the east side of Main Street that gets sent to Croswell Drive. This is one where it goes down the middle of Main Street, and this is really done more for proximity and also the balancing utilization. So this is an area that was sent from Willow Drive to Croswell Drive Elementary School. And if we want to go back and look at any of these areas, we're more than happy to go back and revisit some of these areas. So looking at the north, you can see that Oakland, Shaw Heights, and High Hills Elementary they share one zone. They are what we call a grade center concept, and that you have a K-5 model that send students at small subsets of the grade levels to each of these three schools, and they're fed by one zone. As I mentioned, Rafting Creek, this is the current zone for Rafting Creek, and the enrollment for Rafting Creek is fairly low. It's 117, I think it was, and so we saw the need to bring the enrollment of Rafting Creek up while adhering to the other criteria, and also the Oakland, Shaw, High Hills zone could use to lose some students in order to balance things out and make things equitable. And so you'll see what we've done, and I'm going to toggle on option 1, is that Rafting Creek then comes down into Peach Orchard Road, and some areas on Peach Orchard Road would feed from the Oakland, Shaw, High Hills zone into Rafting Creek. So Rafting Creek comes all the way up to the actual Little Rafting Creek, and now it stretches further east to bring up their enrollment, picking up areas off of Black River Road, Peach Orchard Road, and then even coming down some into Route 521 and Thomas Sumter Highway. So with all of these changes, there are causes and effects, and as it relates to the numbers, the utilization and enrollment numbers of the schools, as well as the splits in the demographic composition of the schools and things like that. And so that's something that we are continuing to study, and I have some feedback that I've provided on these maps. At least this elementary option 1. Anybody have any questions before I go into it? I'm going to just keep on moving, and then you guys can just interrupt me if need be. So looking at option 1, some of the advantages of this option is that we have resolved the satellite boundaries. That boundary that I identified at Kingsbury and Alice Drive, they no longer exist. You do have relatively balanced utilization among the schools with this. You get rid of the ones that are in the 70s and the ones that are in the low utilization, and try to bring them more into balance. This option is the one that it impacts the fewer numbers between the two options. So that is an advantage if you're comparing them between the two options. We do have a transportation efficiency improvements in this scenario with some of the adjustments that we have drafted here. and that students are going closer to their home. And this also has fewer splits from middle to high school, from elementary to middle school, I'm sorry, than the current zones. Currently, you have 4 elementary schools, 4 splits from elementary to middle. And in this option, there are only 3 schools from elementary to middle that are split, and all the other ones feed 100%. Some of the limitations on this is that demographics, some of the schools draw closer to the county average, while others do extend further from the average. The demographic impacts on some of these are things that do need to be noted and looked at to see if it's something that we may be creating a negative impact as it relates to the demographics of schools, and it's something that we do need to look at and study as we look at it. I'm going to go to the handout real quick and just talk about this, what I'm seeing here. So looking at this, at the demographics of the schools, you could see that in many cases the demographics are getting closer to the average. So we look at the district average for the race and see, trying to get somewhat closer to mirror or resemble that of the county. We want to try to be no more, I would say it's best to be no more than 15%, if at all possible, from the district average, but there are times when you can't avoid having a deviation further than that. So really what we have to do is see if there are imbalances, is there any way that we can move an area, shift areas around to keep the same balance of all the other criteria while making the demographic statistics a little bit closer to the county average. And in option 1, they do look pretty good. Take a look at these here. I'm trying to get them all on the screen so I can see them. But you could see that some of them do get further away. Like I see Croswell Drive that actually draws closer. It's currently 82% black, and then the option 1 that goes down to 80. Another one that you'll notice is let's see. In this particular case, they don't look that bad. They are all relatively doing a pretty good job in terms of getting better than the current, and in most cases. And so anybody have any comments about some of the demographic data that you may be seeing initially? All in all, this option, I think, does a better job from an element of the demographic component of the criteria than option 2 as it relates to elementary schools. And this is something that I know, again, it's a lot of information, and I would expect that you guys would give it some more time to study this data, and you can always reach out to me in between committee meetings if you have any comments or questions. I'm here for you, and I'm available anytime that I can be to talk with people if they have questions offline or want to know about the maps a little bit better. Another limitation I identified with option 1 elementary school is that the feeder pattern splits are a little bit less balanced than the current. If you look at the current, going to the feeder pattern section, you can see currently you do have a 92.8%, and so that has been resolved, I believe. We don't have the 92.8%, but we do have a couple of 85.15s, and Cherryvale splits 85.15, and then Rafting Creek splits 15% to Ebenezer, 85% to Hillcrest. Currently, you do have the 92.8, but Willow Creek goes 92% to Alice Drive, 8% to Chestnut Oaks, We've resolved that, which is good. We have a couple that are the 85-15. That's not the best split in my opinion, but in your current zones have some that are close to 50-50, which I think is good. But it is what it is. It's something that we know that we can, that me personally, the 85-15 isn't prohibitive, but it's not the most ideal split. As more of like the 50-50s that we see in some of your current zones. If there's no questions, I'm going to go to option 2 now. Keep moving ahead. So option 2 has a little bit of a different look. As just toggling back and forth on this screen, you can see like this is option 1, this is option 2. My eye kind of already draws to the Rafting Creek zone, and looking at option 2, you can see this is 2. The Rafting Creek zone gets a little bit larger, closer to Oakland, Shaw, and High Hills compared to option 1 as it sits here. And then if I keep toggling, there are some changes down in the Kingsbury-Wilder region. The same adjustments that we talked about with R.E. Davis exist, but there are some changes within sort of the city and within the city and some of the areas immediately around the city. So let's take a look at that. So if I look at element the current zones and toggle on option 2, and now that it's refreshed, I can toggle them back. See that they do change shape. Looking at Cherryvale, you can see this is the current zone for Cherryvale. If I turn on option 2, Cherryvale has some area that is just east of Cherryvale feeding into Alice Drive. And this is something that really was done to balance utilization, that we did not move the area south of Wedgefield Highway out of Cherryvale, and so this was moved into Alice Drive for utilization. It does have some limitations just between these two schools, because you can see that we're getting close to Cherryvale in this map and sending them to Alice Drive, and may not be the most ideal in terms of proximity. And option 2 is the one that I'm not the biggest fan of. There are some things with option 2 that I think have some weaknesses that need to be resolved. This is one part of it that does not sit too well with me. Alice Drive also has a little bit higher utilization in this, so it may be something that may need to be adjusted to resolve the proximity and maybe a utilization imbalance here. Looking at Kingsbury and Wilder in the south here, you can see that this looks a lot different in this particular map. This was basically, currently, Kingsbury comes around, the Wilder zone comes around and feeds in past Kingsbury into Wilder, and Kingsbury has a satellite. This particular map is really more focused on proximity, seeing what happens if we block these off into a Kingsbury and Wilder zone. In terms of proximity, you can see that Wilder also, if you look at this blue area, Wilder does have some area that currently goes to Millwood and Alice Drive, feed down into Wilder, and then they also pick up this enclave. Again, the result of this is something that, to me, it's almost prohibitive, in my opinion. And one of the things that I see with this that I don't like is the impact on demographics for this particular one. Particularly the demographics of Wilder do deviate farther from the district average. In particular, the black population, it goes up and to a level that does bring it further out of balance. Something that I think does need to be addressed and maybe removed from consideration. But it's something that would like to hear from you and your your thoughts. It's a look in terms of proximity and balancing utilization, but I think that this one does have some issues with the demographics that need to be addressed or discussed. And the way I see it, the way I say it is that as we evaluate options here, we need to evaluate things that work, and then we also need to test things and to see what doesn't work. So if this one does become an issue that is prohibitive as it relates to the demographic impacts, it's something that we can say that we looked at it and that this is why it may or may not work. And I'll show you the numbers here. I'll show you right now, why don't I? What I'm seeing. Wilder was the one that really shot out to me the most. Currently, Wilder has a 76% black population, 18% white. And in this particular map, Wilder goes up to 95%. So that, to me, that's almost a non-starter. It's something that has to be addressed or maybe looked at, because that's something that we don't want to have be as a result of this realignment and create schools that are further out of balance or further away from the district average. So you can see what happens when we take Kingsbury and Wilder and do some of that. It does create a negative impact, in my opinion, in terms of having a greater imbalance of race in some schools. Lemira Elementary, I didn't talk about much in option 1. Lemira Elementary is unaffected as well in option 1 and in option 2. So that school does not have any adjustments in these particular options right now. We do have the similar adjustments for Croswell that you saw in option 1 and R.A. Davis, where we send some area south from Davis into Croswell Drive Elementary School. Some areas, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer here. Willow Drive sends some area to Croswell Drive Elementary School on the eastern side in between Willow and Croswell. And looking south, I think we have similar map, the looks as the current zones. The one adjustment you'll see with Manchester and Pocalla Springs is there's an area right down here that juts out currently from Furman, near Furman Middle School, and it currently feeds over into Manchester off of Branch Road, and it's off of Underwood Road. This area we feed into Pocalla Springs. I don't think that exists in option 1. In option 1, you see that stays in Manchester right here, and in option 2, that area moves. So back to the advantage and limitations of this one. We do resolve the satellite areas in this map as well. Utilization is balanced. Transportation efficiency is provided in this map, and there are more efficiencies as it relates to transportation. And this does have the same number of feeder pattern splits as current, so we see that as an advantage. We're not increasing the number of splits. But the limitation, as I mentioned, is some of the demographics. As some draw closer to the average, there are some that draw further away to a degree that I think needs to be addressed. And in particular, the Wilder Elementary School is one that I have that's on my radar as something that I don't feel comfortable with the resulting demographic impact for that particular school. I'm gonna keep moving on. If people have any questions, I'm gonna move to middle school if nobody has any other questions or comments about the elementary school adjustments or options. What? Give me something, guys. What are you thinking right now? What are your thoughts? Are you guys in shock, or are you guys not surprised? Are you surprised? Is this kind of something that you're thinking, or are you just taking it all in right now?
I'm not surprised, Mr. Cropper. I'm very familiar.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Dr. Baker.
I say I am not surprised. I'm very familiar with all of these lines and communities, so I'm not surprised at looking at particularly option one. Okay. Well, I'm gonna keep on going. I just want to make sure I'm not getting ahead of people and things. Let's talk about middle and high school. And so middle and high school, there are more impacts at the middle and high school level. And this is because the current middle school zones, you can see, do surround the city, for looking at like Furman and looking at R.E. Davis, and even Ebenezer stretches around Hillcrest a little bit in the county. And so in option one, you see that we do have it's a different shape, and this is something, it's a new look. It's something that would be, basically looking, and these have been developed, looking holistically at the whole county. You'll see a lot of similar lines that we've made at elementary school follow for middle school as we look at feeder pattern alignment. I'm going to go ahead and go into the rundown and just look at the middle schools real quick to give you a little orientation on the middle school zones. So I'll just start up here. Since I started the South Elementary, I started the North and in the middle, and then we'll make our circle back around. So looking at this, these are the current zones. In middle school option one, you see that the Hillcrest Middle School zone does take on a different shape from currently. You'll see these bold outlines. When you look at the maps, the bold outlines show you what the current zone looks like, so you can kind of start to see where it overlaps or where we're moving areas from or to. But the Hillcrest Middle Zone does take, it looks more of a north-south orientation, where currently Ebenezer goes up into Rafting Creek, feeds into Ebenezer. In this particular map, you see that Rafting Creek feeds into Hillcrest, and then the southern, some of Cherryvale feeds up into Hillcrest in this particular map. And this is all done with, again, looking at all these factors in mind: utilization, distance, feeder patterns, and demographics and things like that. The Ebenezer zone does not take on any new area. The Ebenezer zone just really ascends the Rafting Creek area into Hillcrest. And I think that the result of that is because there was an existing imbalance, more students at Ebenezer than Hillcrest. So taking students and sending them into Hillcrest brings things into more of a balance. Also factoring in the students that are coming in from out of zone. We're looking at students living in these zones to try to give you a stable foundation for the population of these schools. Looking at in the city, and sort of on the western part of the county in the city, looking at Alice Drive Middle School, look at the current zone. The Alice Drive Middle School is in the center of the city currently with the zone. And looking at middle school option one, you can see it does take on a different shape. Some of Cherryvale feeds into Alice Drive, and then also some of Alice Drive on the eastern side of Alice Drive goes into Chestnut Oaks. And I'll toggle them back and forth. You can kind of see how it shifts in this particular draft option. And so a lot of this in the north, this area on the the western edge of the city, all currently goes down into Furman.
And what we've done is trying to, with the focus on proximity, trying to get students closer to their homes and seeing how that looks. And so you can see that's why we've taken that northernmost part of Furman and sent it to either Hillcrest or Alice Drive. And then we did send some of Furman into Bates Middle School as well. And those are the areas that we sent to Kingsbury and Wilder to try to follow that feeder pattern as we work through it. And then looking up in the area, the R.E. Davis area does feed into Chestnut Oaks. And this is the same area that we fed into Croswell Drive. This is the current R.E. Davis because it's K8. And then this feeds into Chestnut Oaks Middle School. I'm sorry if I'm going long, guys. It's a lot of material to cover. Bear with me. When we get through this, these maps, I'll be pretty much done with my exploration of this, and then have more discussion if needed. And I think we'll be good to go. But I want to make sure I cover this for you guys. Typically, we do 2 hours on these meetings, these committee meetings, and usually we need about 2 hours to get them covered. But we won't keep you any longer or shorter than we have to. Some advantages of this particular option is that the utilization is balanced among the schools. Your middle schools have a comparable utilization. The demographics of the middle schools do draw closer to the county average. We do have transportation efficiency that is improved by assigning students closer to their homes. And those are all advantages that I have identified. Some limitations of this is that we may be putting a little bit too many students in Chestnut Oaks Middle. They're at 71% in this option. I think that we may probably need to bring that number down a little bit or look at ways to do that. This does move more students than option 2. And then the middle to high school splits, currently you don't have any splits from middle to high school, but we do have splits that go from middle to high school in these scenarios. And so that is something to be mindful of. And I'll just look at them real quick here. So see, currently you're 100% to your middle to high, and then in option 1 we do have some splits. No school is split 3 ways. They only do the two-way splits, and we've done our best to try to have them balanced. But it's common to have middle school split to high school as we work on this, and just trying to make sure that they are balanced if at all possible. But there are splits from middle to high school where currently you have 100% middle to high school feeders. Option 2, I'm just going to toggle back and forth between 1 and 2 a little bit so you can kind of see that's 1, that's 2. So around the county area, the zones don't differ a whole lot between 1 and 2. But there is there is movement within the city and in some areas that are around adjacent to the city area in option 2. But you see similarities with R.E. Davis, Hillcrest, and Ebenezer up in the north aren't very the same. And then Furman looks to be the same in this between 1 and 2, the zone shape for Furman. But it does differ in town, and so I'm going to show you that real quick. Okay. So looking at in the central part of the county, Alice Drive sends some area that is in the northern part of Alice Drive into Ebenezer in this map. Ebenezer does pick up more students south, and so we're sending students up into Ebenezer. I think a lot of it's done more for utilization, trying to balance utilization of the schools and just a different look at utilization. We do get a little bit closer to Alice Drive in terms of proximity in this map, which may be a challenge or a limitation for this particular map. Toggle back on the current zones, look at option 2. And you'll see again the area that was Furman on the western end of the city is either feeding into Ebenezer or Hillcrest Middle School. And just much like you saw, the Hillcrest moves are just much like we saw in option 1. The area off St. Paul's Church, they stay in Hillcrest in this option. And we were looking at moving it to Furman because it's closer, but we also run into issues with feeder pattern splits and really small splits, and then also some utilization challenges there, and trying to keep things balanced. But the Bates Middle School zone is fed by Kingsbury and Wilder in this particular scenario, mostly. And you could see that the current Alice Drive area on the south, some of the area south of Liberty Street would feed into Bates Middle School in this particular map. And east of Gungar Road? Ginyard. Okay, so that's where we have some differences in the current versus the option. And then you'll see also that some area around Millwood that is currently in Bates feeds up into Alice Drive, and that's done more for feeder pattern alignment. So just to back a recap on option 2, that we do balance utilization in this map. The demographics do draw closer to the district average. We do impact fewer students in this map than option 1. And we do have transportation improvements in terms of proximity to schools. One of the things I have noted is that we are, for the next round of meetings, we're going to calculate distance, average distance of students, current and in the options, so that we can have some data to be able to quantify the transportation efficiencies. So, I'm going to, we have that noted to give you some more data on distance for the next meeting to help support that discussion. Some of the limitations of this is that the demographics of Alice Drive and Furman do raise to 40%, getting further away of the county average as the zones, the resulting demographics of these zones for Alice Drive and Furman. We're not at the 15% out of the average that I kind of use as an earmark threshold, but still to keep drawing further away, that's something that we try not to do if all possible. And then again, we have the middle school splits that exist that you currently don't have. I don't know if there's any way to avoid that with a comprehensive plan like this, merging these two formerly independent sets of zones together. We're finding that it's very difficult to have 100% feeder pattern. Okay, I'm going to get into high schools now, and then I've got high school 1 and 2, and then I'll be done. I'm sorry for all the time spending on this, but I want to make sure you guys are familiar with it before we let you study them more in anticipation for the next meeting. High schools. So you can see high schools. And as we got from elementary, it wasn't too bad in proximity. You had some areas we had to resolve. Middle schools, we had to do more. High schools, you could see fewer schools, so you have a lot more stretching, a lot more students further away from the closest school in high schools. And as particular Crestwood, you can see Crestwood, how it stretches around pretty much takes up the northern part of the county, and then Lakewood takes up the southern part of the county, and Sumter in the middle. Trying to really draw these to be a cohesive one county map. And you'll see that the map does look different, and that basically the city area, there is no longer just one Sumter High School zone in the city. We're looking at it more as sort of three pieces of the pie that really intersect at the city that feed into your three high schools. So in here you can see Sumter High School. Why don't I go to the interactive map? It's probably the best way to look at this. Come out. Current zones and high school option 1. So you can see in option 1, the area that was Crestwood High School wrapping around the area up in Rafting Creek. This actually feeds down into Sumter High School, as well as Oakland, some sections of Oakland, High Hills, and Shaw. Hillcrest, you can see that Hillcrest does get split because as we work through this, we're trying to make them efficient and focus on all the objectives and criteria. But Crestwood does not go as further west than the Camden Highway. But Crestwood does come and pick up some of the area of Chestnut Oaks around Willow Drive and Croswell, and then even some of the Alice Drive area would feed over into Crestwood High School in this map. I'll toggle on the current high school and then high school option 1, and you could see some of the area and how the area in the city goes from Sumter feeding into Crestwood High School in this particular map. You can see that the old or the current Sumter High School zone line is this bold outline. You can see what's happening there. Lakewood picks up the southeastern section of Sumter High School. That feeds into Lakewood High School. We're looking at balancing utilization in addition to all of these other criteria, and so it's a lot of moving pieces and parts. But Lakewood picks up the sort of the southern end of Crestwood zone off of Mims Road and Boulevard Road, and Britton Road. Some of those would feed into Lakewood High School out of Crestwood, and then some of the areas around Lamira and Wilder elementary schools would feed into Lakewood High School, where they currently go to Sumter. And then Sumter High School takes the area of Lakewood that currently comes around all the way up to 378, Highway 76. This is all Lakewood High School zone right now. And this option, that area feeds into Sumter High School. And that does go down south to, let's see where we got some roads back on here, hybrid. Starks Ferry Road. It goes down to Starks Ferry Road in this particular map, and that would feed into Sumter out of Lakewood. And everything north of Starks Ferry Road would feed into Sumter, where currently it goes to Lakewood. So a lot of students are impacted here in these moves to try to get there, but I think that it's something that is probably something that needs to happen in order to accomplish our objectives. And then finally, this northern part, Crestwood High School, Rafting Creek, Oakland, Shaw, High Hills would feed into Sumter High, but not all of the Hillcrest zone. Some of that Shaw, Oakland, High Hills zone would feed into Crestwood, that resulted in that split that I mentioned. So we do balance utilization among all three schools. We do impact fewer students in this map than option 2, although it still moves over 2,000 students. So we're talking about a lot of students being impacted to kind of hit the reset button on the zones and get you to a holistic look comprehensively at all areas within the county and the city. The demographics of the high schools are relatively close to the district average. So the demographics of the high schools do look relatively balanced from what we've seen initially. And then there is transportation improvements as you can see in the map. The limitations is that we do have more feeder pattern splits than option 2 in this particular map. So let's look at 2. I'm going to just toggle on 1 that we just talked about and then look at 2. Back and forth a couple times like the old eye doctor thing. So you can see that in the north, the area that in 1 is pink for Crestwood in option 1. In option 2, that feeds into Sumter. So that's the Camden Highway. This area in the north would feed into Sumter instead of Crestwood in option 2. Some of this area south, I'm going to go back to the interactive map. It's the best way to do it. Let's see. I'll toggle 1 and 2 again. So you'll see that south of Broad Street in option 2, some of this area feeds into Crestwood instead of Sumter, off of Carter Road and Loring Mill Road, north of Wise Drive and Patriot Parkway. Some of that would feed into Crestwood in this map. And then we have Willow Drive. Let's see. The Willow Drive, Croswell, and Alice Drive areas look the same between 1 and 2. And then you'll notice an adjustment that was made difference between 1 and 2 is in 1, we moved that area off of Mims Road and Boulevard, like I said, to Lakewood, out of Crestwood. In this map, it stays in Crestwood. This area that would move to Lakewood stays in Crestwood. And I think that covers, I don't think that the areas in the south here differ at all. So as I'm doing this, you're kind of seeing how I interact with the map, the interactive map. I highly recommend you guys use that as a utility to continue to explore this stuff. But some of the high level stuff with this is that utilization is balanced among these 3 schools. We do have a better balance of demographics among the 3 schools in this option. And there are fewer feeder pattern splits in option 1, and we do have the transportation efficiencies, like I mentioned, and realigning students closer to their homes. In most cases, it's maybe not in every case, but in most cases. But this limitation I've identified, this does impact more students than option 1, although by not much more. But both options impact over 2,000 students, and so I think they are relatively comparable in terms of impacts, although this one does impact more than option 1. Any questions you guys have in looking at this? What is your gut feel on middle and high school as we looked at it?
All right.
Surprises, things that you like or don't like about the maps? Any input that you can provide to us that maybe help us see how we're tracking on these?
Mr. Cropper, Ms. Ray has a question.
Well, more of a comment. I think it's a good start, and there's some logical changes in there for us to consider. One thing I just wanted to mention is I've had concern addressed about the middle school splits to high school, particularly with Bates and Lakewood, going to Lakewood and Sumter High. But I think a lot of that is us adjusting to this being a total county map and getting away from the city in the middle. So that's going to be something I'm sure we're going to have to address as we go through this.
Yeah, we did try. We always strive for that 100% feeder. That's something that we try to have. But as you can see, it is a challenge here in looking at this holistically, like you say.
All right, Mr. Austin?
So what I would really appreciate is if you as members of the committee, as you continue to look at this between this and the next meeting, I really would like to get some input from you and some feedback. I know this is a lot of data dump on you right now, and it's kind of overwhelming. Okay, we have a question, Mr. Alston.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Is there a way, maybe at the next meeting, where we can see the overlap between the elementary and middle?
Yes.
Right now, just going back and forth, toggling between option 1 of elementary and option 1 of middle, it seems as though you have the most contiguous schooling going on between those two options.
Okay.
But just to be able to see that actually
Yes.
in an interactive map.
We can create that. We can create a map. We do have a map that has the like elementary zones as the background color, and then we'll have middle and high school as outlines, different color outlines. So you can kind of see them all in one. And we have some ways to do that, and I'll bring that to you. I've also thought that we could also develop large plot maps for something that we could print and have shipped to you guys if you think it would be beneficial to have large maps in front of you that you could look at on the table and kind of see them up close, and you can sort of browse around the maps while I'm going through it. Would that be something that would be helpful for you?
Yes.
I think the consensus is yes. Mr. McLeod?
Yes, sir.
All right, do you have any questions? Mr.
Well,
McLeod?
just a comment, what you've shown us tonight, Mr. Cropper, is, I think what most of us were envisioning, something similar to this is what I was envisioning. So I think you've done a good job, I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. I think there's still work to be done, there's some things that I think need to be improved on the maps, and I'm really looking forward to, hopefully I'm sure that as the public starts to see these, we're gonna start to get input from the public. And one of the things I'll tell committee members is that this is when the heat starts to get hotter in realignment, and you start looking at maps and students moving. A lot of comments from parents and things like that who are resistant to change and things like that. And so I always encourage board members and committee members to keep your resolve and stay focused on the plan and stay focused on developing a plan that's best for all students, because you're going to come up to some resistance here shortly. And and we need to hear what people have to say. We need to hear the input, but what we have to do is separate the emotion from that and focus on why may they have a concern, and does their concern help relate to the criteria? Is there anything that they're bringing to us that can help us make the maps adhere closer to the criteria as a whole?
Mr. Cropper, now, do any of our virtual folks have any questions? I don't know if they communicated in chat, or I see one from Ms. Sullivan, I believe.
Yes, and I can go ahead and read that for the record. I think it'd probably be good to do that because it's a good comment. But Ms. Sullivan commented, "Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this team and for all the information. While I have no input this session, I want to thank everyone for their hard work in improving the quality of education for all Sumter children for the long term. This is important and worth the effort." So,
And I
so
believe,
thank you.
yes, sir. I believe there was one from Ms. Collier also. I thought I saw that one flash up earlier.
Yes, that comment says, "Time is well spent for understanding. The maps make a little more sense now." And another comment said, "Digesting the info and appreciate the rundown." So this is all natural. It's a normal part of the process. People are just really digesting the information, getting used to how it's being presented. And and starting to think, and at the next step in the learning process, trying to say, okay, now that I understand it, how can it maybe change, or what would be the impact of making change?
Okay, and I believe Mr. McLeod has a question or comment.
Mr. Cropper, I just a suggestion, and you've been doing this a whole lot more than any of us, but, is maybe more town hall meetings, more connection with the, community. I mean, we have a lot of rural areas, and a lot of those folks can't travel to the, the different areas where we're having the town hall meetings, or can't get on to do it virtually.
You bring up a good topic, because that was something that I wanted to talk about next steps. And when we did our board update on Monday, there was that concern was raised, and I wanted to bring it up to the ad hoc committee, and that the board member does want to have had the same thing, is making sure that we reach out to all communities and those who may not have the ability to participate the way that we have set up. So that's really, it's up to you guys to determine how you want to engage the community beyond what we have. If you want to have some, right now I'm tasked to do this remotely. But if we need to do face-to-face meetings and have an expanded community engagement outreach process in the rural communities, either I can work with the district to figure out a plan for me to come into town and do some more of that, or I can help enable you guys with stuff, materials, so that you guys can go out and do it independent of myself. However I can help, I'm more than happy to do so.
Okay, thank you, sir. What I was gonna say to that, and I'm gonna get to you just a second, Mr. Austin, is that what I feel, and certainly the committee needs to weigh in on this, we need to carry this back to our entire board and get some discussion there and some feedback from them, and then of course we'll get back with you on that. But it is something that has been brought up, and as you said, it was brought up Monday night, so what we will do is have some dialogue with the entire board, and then we'll be back with you. Now, Mr. Austin.
Yes, I was just going a suggestion, maybe with the ad hoc committee members, maybe we can be out in our community as far as having like a watch party where we can lead the discussion in our respective communities, or to gain input from the community ourselves to bring back to the community. And I don't know if it's something that we could task the superintendent with looking at, as far as maybe reaching out to county council about the utilization of community centers to host watch parties, to get the community, it's basic community centers in the majority of our rural areas that could serve as a watch party location.
I think that's a good suggestion. The only thing is, not the only thing, but I always think of the pros and cons of anything. And we just want to make sure that committee member isn't isolated with a group of angry parents and they're there by themselves trying to talk about the maps, that could put them in a situation where they may be where they may be at a disadvantage in terms of not knowing everything and having to talk about the maps as one individual.
Maybe we should go in small groups.
Something like that may be better, but I think it's a good idea. So ways to engage, make sure that as many people know what's going on as possible. It's very important.
Okay, very good. All right. Any other questions, comments from anyone, virtual or here? Well, I don't hear any. I want to again thank everyone for joining us this evening, and as Mr. Cropper stated, please continue to visit SumterRealignment.com for latest information and to provide public input. The board and committee will be updated throughout October and November, and the second public information session is scheduled for December the 14th. And again, thanks to everyone, our folks here in person and our folks participating virtually, and to our superintendent, Dr. Martin Knox, and our administrative assistant, Miss Amy Hanson, and of course to you, Mr. Cropper. You certainly are a wealth of information when it comes to providing this, and so again, thank you so much. And having said that, if there's no further business, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you. You know,